more and more we have people associating animal rights advocacy and unfortunately using the specific term animal rights and associating this with this word eco-terrorism, or even just talking about terrorism. The way we got eco-terrorism is an interesting history. It's sort of a turning the tables history, because the wise use movement, which wanted to commodify nature, wanted to commodify public lands, actually got involved with, well, there were certain people on the fringes of this movement who were not adverse to making threats. So little by little, the movement became associated with intimidation. This is the wise use movement. Now, after the Murrah Federal Building was targeted in a terrorist attack in 1995 in Oklahoma City, the wise use movement realized that the legislators were going to be turning in a hard way against anything that smacked of intimidation, terrorism, death threats, and so forth. So at that point, Ron Arnold, who was no dummy, certainly, but quite articulate person, decided to tone down the rhetoric and little by little refocused the paradigm so that the people who were the Greens, the environmentalists, the animal activists, they were to become associated with intimidation, with death threats, and so forth. And there you have this book in 1997 about eco-terrorism, you know, the violent agenda to save nature. All of a sudden, it was the green people who were going to be associated with whatever militia movement type of scenario, vigilante type of scenario, and that's what happened. And unfortunately, there are some people who claim to speak for the animal movement, the animal advocacy movement, also the environmental movement, who do condone, excuse, justify certain forms of intimidation, even violence, in the name of their cause. So part of this is people who actually claim to speak for the movement itself, saying that at some point a movement has to have its violent factions. At some point, you're only going to get mainstream movement. The mainstream movement will only be successful if you have people behind it who are willing to, you know, sort of carry a stick. And more you're hearing this rhetoric by people who claim to speak as advocates. And since then, we have seen a spate of anti-terrorism laws throughout the states, just as we have a federal anti-terrorism law that deals with people who are opponents of animal enterprises. We have a federal law that targets people who do certain crimes that would have been, or who are accused of doing certain crimes that would have been considered criminal anyway, but now because it's against an animal enterprise, the penalties are far stricter. So there's an element here of ideology that the government is centering on. You're seeing states now pick up on this idea and starting to use the word eco-terrorism now. Whereas they used to use words like animal enterprise protection, now you'll see eco-terrorism or animal enterprise terrorism. This kind of rhetoric is actually becoming, you're seeing it in the laws, in the names of the laws.